The title, Lois and Clark, A Blackmailer's Attempt. Written by Susan Cosno, published 10/10/2017. Chapter 1. Clark Kent was a young man of just 28 years old. He had a good job as a top reporter at the Daily Planet and Metropolitan. But he had a secret only his parents knew. He knew he was the man of steel. And as he had gotten older, he had learned something of his heritage, but still had many questions about how and why he ended up in a small town by the name of Smallville here on Earth. Every day, he dedicated his life to helping others. He had long ago made the decision not to let anyone know who he was and what he could do. He wasn't even sure of the latter. But today, a special message had come into the Daily Planet and had left him a large manila envelope. He opened the envelope, not thinking much of it. As a reporter, it was not a rare occasion that he would get that sort of delivery. But today, the delivery was different. Inside the envelope was a picture of him coming into an alley, going away, and then just moments later coming back out as the Man of Steel, the man known as Superman. There was no threat, no words, just the picture. Clark's hand shook as he looked at the photo. It did not see Lois until it was almost too late. Lois is his partner at work, and for every matter. She was a very curious person, and one thing he could say about Lois Lane was once she set her mind up about something, she would stick to the subject like a dog to a bone. He could not let her see what he had received. Lois had been going off the elevator when she had seen the man delivering a package to her partner. She knew Clark, and although he was as good as an investigator reporter, she was better. She noticed that he had put the envelope away quickly when he had seen her walking into the room. Lois went over to the desk that was right across from Clark's desk and looked at him. "So what's in the envelope?" she asked him. Lois was not going to stop asking about the envelope, so Clark knew that she had to tell her something. One thing he decided many years ago, he would never lie, so what does he do? He looked up her with a smile and said, "It's just a silly picture of me. I think it should go in the rubbish." Lois laughed. "A picture of you? Why did someone take a picture of you?" "Never mind, people are always taking pictures of me and wanting me to take an autograph to them. You had better do that, or this person will not let you go." She warned. She was happy with the answer and went back to her desk to work. Lois and Clark had been busy working on the story investigating the Department of Public Works for the city. There had been some questions about the bridge repair that was being done on one of the major bridges. The cost had gone way out of proportion, and they were both sure that something in the department was putting their hands into the till. The amount of money that was in question was over $250,000. Perry White was the editor-in-chief of the Daily Planet and had one saying, "Old news is history." We want the news as it happens, not afterward. He was well aware that his two-star employees were working on a story that could make the banner. He also knew that if things got rough enough, they could get rougher. They had both been in danger before and met danger like a bull. He was strong-minded and appreciated the work that Lois and Clark did for the newspaper. As the two reporters worked side by side, going after paper, they looked up to find Cat Grant giving Clark the eye. She thought that he was the best thing she had ever walked into the Daily Planet, and she was just loving the time. She was a society woman, was known for her scant clothing. Kat had her eyes on Clark and offered to make him to a party, but was being thrown by the mayor of the city that night. At first, Clark was hesitant to say yes. Kat could be a handful, but what a way to get to know some of the members of the Department of Public Works. The head of the department was supposed to be there that night, and he looked over at Lois, who was totally disgusted with the thought of Clark and Kat. He then smiled and said, "I would be glad to go with you. Perhaps you can introduce me to Jerry Carey, the head of the Department of Public Works." Business, that is all Clark ever thinks of. But she smiled, and she would be ready for 8 o'clock. She would make her move towards him when Lois wasn't around and on her own turf. She knew that she could be hard to turn down when she was dressed to kill. This would be a great night, and yes, she would look at her best. Lois just glared at her as she went back to work. She was not interested in Clark as a boyfriend, but she thought that she should have been better dating Cat Grant. Oh, why didn't you have someone else take her that would go with you? But no, there'll be a fly in the wall. As she and Clark walked home, she wished him luck into her apartment. Once inside, she made herself a large fudge sundae. Lois's sister Lucy came into the kitchen and found her sissy busy eating the sundae and asked her, "Bad day, huh? Bad day with Clark?" Lois just rolled her eyes and told her, "He's going out with Cat Grant tonight to a party for the city. I sure wish I could go." "Well, not meaning to muddle, but you are going to have to make up your mind about Clark or Superman. They both aren't going to hang around waiting for you forever, you know." Lois took a large bite of the sundae and groaned. Lucy was right. Chapter 2. Cat Grant was very excited to have a date with Clark Kent. She had been interested in the man ever since the first day that he had walked into the office. He was a good-looking and smart as they come, but Lois Lane had her eyes on him too. Lois would not be happy with the hero they called Superman. No, she wanted Clark too. But she was playing a head game with a young, naive Clark. She acted as though she was not interested in him, but when someone tried to show an interest, she stopped them. Lois did not know what she was up against. Kat was going to win Clark's heart, and she would start working on it tonight. Kat had to be careful of what she wore. She wanted to dress appropriately for the reception, be conservative for her date, Clark Kent. She chose a dress with a suggestive neckline, but not too low. She also chose a pair of shoes with a lower heel that she was used to. She wanted to give Clark the impression that she was shorter than she was. Clark Kent was in his apartment choosing out a shirt and tie. He only had one formal suit, so he didn't have to choose that very difficultly. He laughed to himself, and then he saw the envelope that he had placed on the table next to him. He was going to have to figure out what to do with the picture, but tonight he was going to be busy on a story. As Clark approached Kat's apartment, he pulled up in front and checked himself in the mirror. He was dressed all right and approved of the image in the mirror. He walked to her apartment and knocked on the door. Now he had been there before and did not want to linger for very long that night. As Kat opened the door, she was impressed with what she saw. She was a very beautiful woman, had been dressed very unconservatively for the party, and he wasn't sure she was trying to impress him or the other guests. that were going to be there. Either way, he was impressed, and as he took her arm and they went down to his car, he smiled and opened the door for her. Kat was happy with the way Clark was treating her. He was a fine-looking man when he was at work, but tonight, all dressed up, he was very handsome. She could see his muscles, and she could almost taste him. As Kat took Clark through the crowd, she introduced him to everyone. He had met the mayor before, but many of the people were strangers to him. He looked around the room using his X-ray vision to see what might be hidden. The room looked clean, and he decided to start listening to the people. He was listening in when Kat took his arm and showed him Jim Miner, the head of the Department of Public Works. Lois and he had been trying for weeks to speak to Mr. Miner, but had no luck. Whatever they saw him, he was on his way to a meeting, and when called him he was not at his office. If he had been very irritating to both of them, and now he had the man right next to him. As they walked over to Jim Miner, he spotted them, and he tried to steal away, but Clark was the first to reach him and caught right up to him. And that's when Kat introduced him. She was good, too. She stood in such a way that Jim Miner would have to ask her to move, get around her. Clark smiled to himself. She was just like Lois, indeed. Clark went right into the investigation mode and asked him, "We're looking into some shortages that have been reported missing in your department. Do you have something to say about that?" "I'm not at liberty to talk about that investigation that is ongoing, but we are investigating it to the end," he told him. "It has been reported that there's going to be a long period of time. What is your answer to that?" Clark asked. "Will we be giving a press conference, so it is something that we can be told? Right now," I said, "I cannot say anything. But if you find something that you're willing to investigate, you're welcome. Excuse me." And with that, he was off to talk to other people. Clark was a gentleman and danced and mingled with Kat. He heard the talk of him and how he was investigating. He was the topic of many of the conversations, but he heard nothing from Joe Miner. As Kat and Clark left the party together, Clark watched as he saw a young man with a camera. He seemed to be taking quite a few pictures of him and Kat. Clark standing next to him and started to walk toward him. At first, the man looked as though he was thinking of running and walking out, but then he decided to stand his ground. The photographer was a young man. He smiled at the two of them and approached him. "Well, hello, Miss Grant and Mr. Kent. How are you today? I just thought that you were taking a lot of pictures and I would like to see them." The young man seemed to be surprised, but he let Clark look at the pictures. There were indeed many photos that had been taken. The young man introduced himself as Chris Rennie, and he was a freelance photographer. "I'm trying to get some pictures that might not get me into any trouble, but get me into notoriety as a famous photographer." Clark looked through all the pictures and handed them back to the camera. He asked him, "Are there a lot of freelance photographers in the city?" "Oh, yes, they're all over the place. That is how we make a living. Some of us," he told him. Clark looked at the card and told him that if he had any of his friends who were bragging about some photos that they had taken, they would have a lot of money to see him. He took the picture and, with a questioning look, looked back through some of the pictures. As Kat and Grant said goodnight, she told him that she would love him to come in. But Clark still remembered the last time and politely declined. He was impressed with her, though. She could be a lady and was actually a pleasure to be with. Chapter 3. Lois Lane lived in a small apartment with her sister Lucy. She was sitting there with her hair in rollers and feeling sorry herself when she heard a strange noise. She walked toward the window, and there was Superman floating in the air outside her window. Great, she thought. She looked like something the cat dragged in, and Cat was out with Clark. Now she looked like this, and Superman was going to come in for a visit. She told him to come in and ran off to her room to put her hair, the rollers out of her hair, and take the sticky bathrobe that she was wearing. Superman laughed to himself as she ran to get herself looking better. He had felt sorry for Lois going out with Cat on her. He knew that she was very upset, but would never let Clark know that she was. As he looked around the room, Lois came into the room like a tornado. Lois tried to walk into the room with dignity, but whenever she was around Superman, she couldn't act like herself. She got all mixed up and did not know what to say. But Superman asked her to dance, and as the two of them danced under the stars, her heart melted even more. They danced, and yet their feet never touched the floor. As Superman told her good night, she just waved. This is an evening she would remember for the rest of her life. As she went to bed, she stared at the ceiling for hours. But now it was time for Clark to get down to business. He had a photo that could harm him, and he was going to find out who was behind the blackmail attempt. As Superman, he would do anything to protect his identity, and under no circumstances was going to allow anyone to blackmail him. He started with the envelope. The courier who had brought it was from a local company. The first thing in the morning, he was going to find out who had sent it if he could. But it was late at night, and after a few trips around the city, Clark decided to go back to bed. The next morning was Sunday, and Clark went directly to the courier's office. But it was Sunday, and there was no one in the office that could really help him. He used his X-ray vision and located his file, but it had no name or anything on it. It just had an order for a delivery to be made to him at the Daily Planet. But he did have the courier's name, Gene Streeter. He would go back to work in the morning and talk to him. The next thing Clark did was go to the spot where the picture was taken. He didn't think that anyone could see him changing back there in the dark alley, but someone had. As he walked down the alley, there was the normal rubbish, but nothing significant. And then he saw a homeless man. He went over to the man and asked him if he ever seen anything there in the last month taking pictures. The man looked shocked to be asked such a question, and Clark could smell that he had been drinking. He handed the man $20 and he took it. As a matter of fact, 3 weeks ago, there was a woman out here taking pictures of the homeless in our situation. She was here for days and supposedly came back, but she never did. Do you know her name? Let me think, he told her, but Clark knew he was going to have to get another 20. He handed the money to the man, and he said name was Brenda, and she was doing an article on us. Do you know anything about her? No, but she talked to a lot of us. She could try the mission down the street. That was a good idea. As someone out on the street interviewing the homeless, the mission would have the information on who Brenda was. As Clark walked into the mission, he found several people who had met and talked to the lady, and none of them had seen her for weeks or knew her last name. Brenda, according to everyone, was a young lady in her 20s who was around the mission district taking pictures and getting information for some kind of article. Perhaps she was a freelance reporter. Perhaps someone in the Daily Planet would have information. Clark looked at his watch and knew it was time for him to head to his parents' house. They had invited him there for dinner, and it was already after 5. As he landed at the farm, he could smell the dinner And when the Kent family all sat down and took their seats at the kitchen table, Clark told them what had been happening. Clark's mother and father were two of the nicest people that you could ever know. They listened with a little bit of worry. They kept the secret of their son for the past 27 years and did not want someone out there in the public blackmailing him. His mother was the first to speak. I think it is good for you that you went ahead and asked questions about the lady by the name of Brenda. She might not be the person that you were looking for, but she is your best lead. Tomorrow morning, I would be there, and when the courier office opens, and speak to the courier right away. Jonathan Kent was indeed worried also. With the things that his son was capable, no one but family should know these things. It had always been a fear of Martha and his that someday someone would somehow find out their secret and the abilities that the son was able to do. Clark, if you learned anything, let us know. If she is a freelance reporter, someone at the Daily Planet might know who she is. What about Lois? Clark had thought about talking to Lois, but she would want to know I was interested in her. I will try to talk to Perry first, but if I have to, I'll talk to Lois. The rest of the visit was friendly, and Clark had a good time, relaxing at the old home. He would worry about the blackmailer in the morning. Chapter 4. Clark Kent said goodbye to his mother and father on that morning and headed back to his new home in Metropolis. It was a warm, sunny day, and the wind felt good against his face as he flew back to his new home. He arrived back to the city at 8 a.m. and headed straight to the Daily Planet. As Clark entered the building, he saw his partner Lois Lane sitting at the desk, hard at work. But as he turned the corner to go down the stairs, he saw the envelope that was sitting on his desk. He tried to act like everything was normal and smiled good morning to Lois. She smiled and came over to him. So, how was the big date with Kat? She asked. But then out of nowhere came Kat, and who came over to Clark, and with the running of her fingers down the side of his face, she told him, "We must have another date together, honey. You and I and me made the society page." And with that, she showed Clark the picture of him and Kat dancing. The paper is going to be out that afternoon, and Clark moaned to himself. This put Clark into another tizzy. She could not stand the thought of Clark with another woman. She wanted him for his own. She wanted Superman for her own. She didn't know what she wanted. She walked over to the desk, sulking, and Clark knew that the rest of the day was going to be a challenge for him. But he had this envelope at his desk. He knew that there was more pictures in it, and the last thing he wanted to do was open the envelope in front of Lois. She had a real nose for news, and she would grab onto the pictures like a dog to a piece of meat. He put the envelope to the side and began to work. However, he used his X-ray vision and looked inside the envelope. Sure enough, inside the envelope were 3 pictures. There were pictures of his mother, father, and the Kent farm enclosed. Clark needed to find out who was blackmailing him, and fast. Clark excused himself and headed over to the courier's office. Clark had not missed the envelope that had been delivered that morning. It was the second time that Clark had received an envelope delivered in the last few days, and she wanted to know what was made of it. She waited for Clark to go to the elevator, and then she rang the elevator for herself. She followed him to the courier's office and waited outside. As Clark came into the office, he saw a nice-looking young lady sitting at the desk. Her name was Karen. He introduced himself, using as much charm as he could. He knew that his charm and good looks sometimes got him information, and he had learned how to use them. I know that you're so busy, so I would like to ask a moment of your time. My name is Clark Kent, and there was an envelope delivered to me this morning. Could you please tell me who sent it? Karen knew of the envelope. She had sent out a courier to the Daily Planet herself. The firm delivered many things to the Daily Planet, but indeed, this had been for the first time she had an envelope that had been dropped off into the inbox, other than the other day when another envelope had been delivered to the same man, Clark Kent, at the Daily Planet. As Karen looked at the young man, she truly wanted to help him. This is all done with the strictest of confidence. I'm sorry, but I can't help you. I can ask the supervisor if they can talk to you. She told him with a smile and then excused her and walked to the small office behind her. Karen wasn't gone long, and she came back with a smile and said the lady in her early 40s welcomed Clark into the office. My name is Miss Task, and how may I help you, Mr. Kent? She asked him with a smile and offered him a seat. I've been sent 2 envelopes to my office in the last 3 days, and I'd like to know who sent them, he said. Miss Task thought for a moment and told him all our businesses are carried out in the strictest of confidence. However, for your case, we do not know who sent the envelope. If it was left in an inbox with a $50 bill attached to it, she said. Clark thought a moment and asked her, did you by any chance have cameras that would be on tape outside the building? I am sorry to be so much trouble to you, but this is very important to me. Clark was telling her as he finished her with a smile once again. She thought for a moment and said to him, I cannot let you see the tapes, but there are only 2 envelopes left at the inbox last night, and I will go over the tapes this morning and get right back to you. When I find the video of the man who dropped off the envelope, she thought to herself that this would be all right because it is information for one of her customers. It was not only solid reasoning, but she would look for this man. The Daily Planet was a good customer to her firm, and she would not want to lose his business. Clark thanked her and walked out of the building, feeling just a little bit better. And that's when he saw Lois standing there looking smug. She came over to him and said, you know, people are always trying to hold something over their heads. If there is someone who's trying to stop doing something, you need to take the bull by the horn and go after them quicker and harder. Never let them give the upper hand. Clark thought for a moment. He could not tell what someone had on him. He certainly was not ready to tell Lois that his true identity was. He liked her, and in fact, he liked her a lot. She was the first person that he had ever been attracted to, and she had a little the dickens to come up with a hard time, but there was no one kinder and determined than she was. She was his partner, and she was his best friend. He looked at Lois and asked her, what would you do if someone had pictures that you did not want anyone to say, he asked her. He had to trust her. She would follow him from there to eternity. He would never get anything done anyways, if he didn't let her at least have some of the problems that he thought to himself. Lois thought now she knew what the problem was. She would not have to have some pictures, but that would come later. There was a mystery, and the only one thing that she liked more than anything was a good mystery. She looked at him seriously and told him, I would talk to Jimmy. He knows a lot of young photographers in town, and there are many that are freelancing, and he would put the word out on who took the pictures. Then, like you, I would go to the courier's office and see what they knew. That's what he had to do. He would go see Jimmy, talk to him. Jimmy was a young man, and he did room with a freelance photographer. Jimmy could put the word out and maybe find out who was doing the photos also. As Clark and Lois walked into the office, they spoke with Jimmy. He had not heard anything, but he would put the words on. He smiled to himself as he thought about how he had been asked. He would do anything as a young man and was anxious to make a good impression on his friends. He would find out the information if he could. The rest of the day was spent on the investigation in the Department of Public Works, and when Clark went get the call from Mrs. Tax, she smiled. She had the man who had left the envelope. He started to leave the office alone, but saw Lois sulking and told her, "Come on, partner, I could use your help." The two friends headed over to the Curry office where Mrs. Trask was waiting them. She handed the video as they watched it. Neither knew the man, but they were going to find out his identity, and they thanked the lady and set off to find out the man's identity. Chapter 5. One of the best contacts of Lois and Clark had been a man by the name of Bobby. He was a street man who knew things and could get the answer sometimes after what he had heard. So that is where we're going to start this morning. They found him and agreed to talk to him. It was talking on the street that a young man took some photos and sold them to someone who wants to use these photos to stop you from looking into the Department of Public Works scandal, he told them. Clark had thought about the possibility and shook his head. Lois knew that this is a common thing when it came to exposing certain people. But what on earth will they have to be on the clean Clark Kent, she thought. She turned to Clark and asked him, "What do they have on you?" The last thing that he needed to do was to tell Lois who he was. He thought that she was a good person and probably very trustworthy, but he knew that the information could be dangerous, and a long time ago he had decided to keep his identity secret. He thought for a moment, then told her, "Someone sent me a picture with a note, no words, just a picture of my mother and father and their farm. I took it as a real threat." Lois looked at Clark. She liked his mother and father. She'd been a member of the one of dysfunctional families that she had ever heard of. Her parents had divorced when she was a young girl, and she had never had anyone but her sister Lucy. Clark, on the other hand, had been raised on a farm in a small town, and he and his family were very close. Clark looked at Lois, hoping that he would be able to satisfy her curiosity. But she was thrilled, and she told him, "Don't worry about this. We will find out who's threatening your family, but I do think that you should call and talk to Jimmy." As the two of them walked into the Daily Planet, they found Jimmy, and Clark had taken the photo of his parents and the farm and asked him for any idea who may have taken them. Jimmy took the photos and looked them over carefully. "These are good photos, and someone has gone a long way to your home to make an impression on you. I can tell you that the photographs are of good quality, and that the camera that was used was a very expensive one. The developing was done on paper flat that you buy at a local store, though. I'll definitely ask around." Clark and Lois thanked him, and then Lois got a thought. The photo of the farm was taken from the air. There can't be too many people in the airplanes in around the area of Smallville. Perhaps you can find out who rented the airplane to take a picture of it, she suggested. That was why he needed a partner. She was very smart, and she was right. He would go to his hometown and find out who took the pictures of the parents' house from the air, he thought. To Lois, he told her, "That's a great idea, but today let's work on getting the guy, Mr. Miner," he said. Clark knew that the chance that someone had rented an airplane out of his hometown was small, but there were airports close to Smallville where a plane that was capable of flying over 2,000 miles could land. It would make more sense that they were to take a plane to the nearby airport and then rent a car. When they get to his hometown, they could rent a plane. But Miner was shrewd, and he had hidden the truth well. He was trying to cover any danger of being caught by blackmailing Clark. They were getting close to something. They made Lois want to dig even deeper. But Clark would go to his hometown before the airport and the next town closed. It was a very small airport, and it would probably be close to 5, and it was now 2 o'clock. He went over to Lois and said he was going to go to Smallville rather than talk to the man at the airport over the phone. Superman is going to take me to Smallville, and I will be leaving soon, he told her. Superman will take you? Do you think he can take me too? Lois, he's doing this as a big favor, and he cannot take both of us. Maybe some other time. She was a little disappointed about it, but she was gotten crazy when Superman was around. She still was disappointed and wished him good luck. Clark headed back to his hometown and went to the small airport that was located just a short distance from his parents' small farm. The airport had only one hangar. A small airport housed mostly planes that were used for fertilization purposes. There were a few pilots that would offer sightseeing tours, but that wasn't much call for that in the area. Gene Clark had worked at the local airport for the past few years, and he graduated with Clark Kent. He was surprised to see him come into the office. "What a pleasure, Clark," he told him, as the two shook hands. "I'm sorry to have to come to it this time, but I need some information." "You need information from me?" he told him. Clark looked at his old friend and said, "Did you have any strangers taking a sightseeing tour or renting an airplane in the airport a short time recently ago?" He remembered the man well. "A man called me one early Monday morning and asked me if I had a small plane that I could rent for a sightseeing tour. Joe Barnes was there, and he agreed to let me rent his plane for the afternoon. Joe has all the information in his pilot's license. He was in his 40s and had some young man with him. He had a camera and wanted to know if I had a plane that could be used that afternoon. They wanted to take pictures of the scenery. You want me to call Joe?" "No, thank you, Gene. I know Joe well, and it's time that we get to see each other again. We don't get together enough, and it'll be nice to see him. Been great seeing you. Please don't let anybody know about our conversation." "No problem, Clark." And with that, Clark headed to the Joe Barnes farm. He found Joe up in the field plowing and called to him. Joe saw him standing by the fence and came right over. "Clark Kent, why, this is indeed a surprise," he said to him as he climbed down off the tractor and shook his friend's hand. "What brings you to the humble farm?" "It's good to see you, Joe, but I'm sorry I'm here for some information. I was told that you rented a plane last Monday to a man and a photographer. Do you know his name?" Joe was surprised that Clark would be interested in some tourists, and he had no problem giving the friends information. As he walked into the house, he was greeted by Renee, Joe's wife. She was very happy to see Clark and asked him to take a seat at the kitchen table. Joe took over the flight log, and there on the page was James Reed's license number, S29036. He was listed as living in Metropolis, and his passenger was David Ames. This is significant. Clark now had the names, and he was on his way to finding out who was trying to blackmail him. He thanked his friends and headed back to Metropolis. It was after 5, but he was sure that he could find Lois still at work. He was right. and she had there to get the information. Chapter 6. Lois jumped up from her desk. This is it, she thought to herself. They now had the name of the pilot who had taken the photographer up to the day. She looked at the name James Reed and found that he worked as a private pilot at the local airport. Jim was just coming down the stairs when she asked him if she knew who had done the pictures. He looked at a name, Donald Ames. He knew Donald and had seen him many times. He had bought himself a new camera. He had asked him about the car, and Donald talked to the car payments he was going to have. Now he wondered if he was going to have any car payments also. Jimmy picked up the cell phone and called Donald, but got no answer. He was about to turn around and tell Lois and Clark that he'd gotten no answer when his phone rang, and it was Donald. He said hello and was surprised to not hear his friend's voice. The man on the other line identified himself as Sergeant Green from the Metropolitan Police Department. He wanted to know what Jimmy wanted with Donald, as Donald had been found dead in the river. Jimmy told him that he was a friend of Donald's, and he was sorry to hear what happened. He turned to his friends Lois and Clark and started to tell them what had happened. But they knew by the sound of the conversations that things weren't good. They had met Sergeant Green many times and knew that he worked homicide. The best lead was now dead, and there was no doubt that the person behind the blackmail was going to stop at nothing to get things their way. Now they were going to have to put their interest on the pilot. James Reed was the next person that they need to get information from, and they had to go to him. But before they found out that David Ames had been murdered. Lois went online and got the phone and address of James Reed, and she and Clark headed to his home. He lived in an upscale part of town, and he answered the door himself. He was surprised to see the famous team of Lois and Clark in front of him. He knew that he had been paid to take some pictures of the Kent farm, but for the money he was questioned from the young man who went with him and why he had been busy taking pictures of the farm. But now he was interested. He had to keep his cool and smiled and allowed the two into this house. He offered them a cup of coffee and took a cup and seat himself. Lois was the first to speak. We have the reason to believe that you were recently in Smallville taking pictures of the Kent farm. Jim looked at him and said, Yes, I was in Smallville, and we did take some photos. Why do you ask? Clark did not want him to know everything, but he wanted to know why. But why would you travel 2,000 miles to take a picture of a farm? I was paid to do a job, so I did it. There's nothing illegal about it. Who hired you? I'm sorry, I can't tell you. It's confidential, Jim told you. Clark looked at the man and said, I'm concerned about anyone who goes snooping around my parents' house. It is important for me to learn, especially now that David Ames has been murdered, he told him, and he waited for a reaction. This threw Jim off. Murdered? Who would murder Jim? He was just a kid. That is why we came here. We have reason to believe that you and your parents' life may be at stake, Clark said, hoping that this would bring him on to his human side. Jim thought for a moment and said, I'm not sure who hired me. They sent me the money through a courier, and inside an envelope were instructions. I left the photos back to the couriers, he told them. Lois and Clark thanked him for the information and laughed. So they received an envelope from a courier, the same courier that was sending threats to Clark. They were going to have to go back to the courier and get some more information. Jimmy wanted to revenge his friend's murder. He knew Don for almost 5 years. They had worked together on a few photo shots and had kept in contact with each other. He decided that he was going to check with all of his friends for any information that could be get about Don. what he had been doing for the past 2 weeks. But some of the people who would usually talk to Jimmy were afraid to talk. They were friendly to him, but would not help him with the investigation. Finally, he came home and saw his roommate. He was the only person left he might be able to help him. When Jimmy was talking to him, he told him, "I only know one thing. The other day, Dan told me he was going to make a lot of money, and he was going to get it from some bigwig that worked for the city. He told me that they would pay cash for it." This was very interesting to Jimmy because he knew that Lois and Clark were working on an investigation of the Department of Public Works and thought that perhaps the things might go together. He would tell them in the morning when he got to work. Lois and Clark left the home of Jim Reed and went to the courier office, but the office was closed. They were going to be there first thing in the morning once more. They were going to find out who was behind all the blackmailing, and most likely the person who killed or murdered Donald Ames. Chapter 7. Clark had gone to his apartment and tried to relax when he heard a knock on the door. He used his x-ray vision and was surprised to see Lois standing there. She looked very upset and was carrying some boxes of Chinese food. Now, there was never a time Clark wasn't glad to see Lois. He had a crush on her. All right, he was infatuated with her, but it was very late at night, and he wanted to know what she was doing there. She came down the stairs and showed him the food. "I was hungry and thought you might like to join me into taking out something to eat. Lucy is gone for the next few days to San Francisco, and I hate to eat alone," she told him as she placed the food on the table. Lois was talking very fast, and Clark could see that she was worried. He looked at her and said, "Lois, what is wrong? You aren't here just to have Chinese, are you?" She turned around and reached into one of the many boxes that she had and said, "Nothing. Can I come and visit a friend?" But she knew she wasn't very convincing. Clark looked at her with caring eyes and just looked at her. She couldn't lie to him. "It's just that when I got home tonight, someone had been in my apartment. They left a picture of my father and mother, too," she told him, and started to fill her eyes with tears. Clark immediately felt sorry for him. She knew that she was going through, but now he was pretty sure who was behind the pictures. It was just terrible that a man from the Department of Public Works had to be involved in some way. She was a dangerous man for sure, but a coward. He was trying to use blackmail to stop him and Lois from doing their investigation. He was sure that he was behind the murder of Donald Ames also. "Lois, I don't think that it would be good for you to stay there tonight alone. Someone thinks they can blackmail us and will not allow us. We'll stick together just fine." "Don't worry," Clark told her. Lois smiled and gave him a big hug. She didn't know what she would do if it hadn't been for this wonderful man in his life. He was her strength, and she was tired, and her partner in life at work. The two friends sat down and ate the food, and neither one of them could eat any more. As they put the leftovers in the refrigerator, Clark brought out Lois some bed things. She made her bed and thanked him. He was such a sweet man. He offered her his bed, but she would not sleep on the couch. Lois actually wanted to stay on the couch where she could keep her eye on the door. The next morning, Lois and Clark headed back to the courier's office. Now the courier had been in Lois's apartment, and Clark was starting to get a bad feeling about the place. There are many couriers in the city. So why is everything coming from this location, he thought to himself. As they approached the courier office, they were met by the same lady who had helped them out the other day. But this day she seemed evasive and said that Karen was not there. He glanced at the door and could see Karen in the room. She looked worried, and he wondered if she had been threatened also. She smiled at the lady. Clark smiled at the lady and said, I saw her come in. It's very important that I talk to her. Karen came out and asked him to come into the office once more. She liked the young man, but she received a call yesterday that had frightened her. The man on the other line had told her to stop talking to those nosy reporters about private things, or things would be going real messy for her. Karen told the truth, and he told her that he would take care of things. He was sure that he and Lois were getting too close to the Department of Public Works scandal, and he was sure that he was going to get better for him and Lois once they found the truth. As Clark came into the office, he found Lois talking to a young woman earnestly. The woman appeared to be very nervous. Clark went over to his partner's desk, and Lois introduced him to Brenda, the lady who had been taking pictures of the people and the homeless. Brenda looked at the young man and knew who he was. She wondered what he was going to do to protect his identity. She was a fool. How could she have thought that $25,000 that she received for the photo was going to cause anything but harm? Now her friend Donald Ames was killed, and she was sure that she was next. Clark looked at the woman as an enemy and wondered just who had told her when she was doing the pictures downtown. He had been careless and had allowed himself to be photographed, but she had been the one taking the pictures. Who did she give the pictures to? Clark confronted her, now not really caring if Lois found out the truth. He would handle her later. Brenda was frightened and many questions, admitted to Lois and Clark the man that she had taken the photos to was none other than Mr. Miner from the Department of Public Works. Clark made up his mind. Something had to be done about that very man. He was to be taken seriously, and he could get Brenda off the hook if she publicly announced that she had been forced to take her photos. It would certainly hurt her credibility, but alternatives were not any better. So Brenda did a complete confession, admitted that she had tried to blackmail Superman and the false photos that the article was set to appear in the column of the Daily Planet. Mr. Miner was currently sitting at his desk and read the newspaper, and he knew that his life was over. He was caught, and his family were going to be ruined. He pulled the gun out of his desk drawer and pulled the trigger. This was not the ending that Clark had imagined, but as Superman, he was to the man's home and removed all the evidence that Miner had hidden. Brenda was now humiliated and moved to hold the secret identity to herself. And once again, Clark was safe.